debating metalheads, and welcome back to another episode of Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris K. We are finally getting to the episode we've talked about a few times. No, not the true Norwegian death metal episode. That's still to come. We're finally getting to 1986, the year of metal.
1986 was an amazing year, and not just because a certain debating metal host was born that year, but because it was truly the year of metal. So many huge albums by some of the biggest metal bands in history were released in 86. Bands like AC/DC, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Guns N' Roses, and Van Halen all released albums in 86, and we're going to talk about a few of them, as well as talk about the year as a whole.
And then when we get to the end, we'll give you our big four metal albums of 1986, which coincidentally may not be the same ones we talk about. So sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin. 1986. What a fucking year that was.
Yeah, going through the list, it's very shocking. Even though I know, but it is.
So the funny thing is, and I did this on purpose. So when we talked about the bands, or when you talked about the bands that released albums that year, AC/DC, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Guns N' Roses, and Van Halen, I purposely put a couple of those names in there because they're big names, but the albums weren't that big. AC/DC, it was the Who Made Who soundtrack, or not the Maximum Overdrive soundtrack with the song Who Made Who. That was it. That and DT, and I think one other song. They were two instrumentals, so it wasn't that big of an album. But Who Made Who itself was a big song. Black Sabbath, was it Seventh Star that got released that year?
7-star. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
okay.
not a D.
Yeah, right. So and then Guns N' Roses, nobody knew who Guns N' Roses was. They released an album that nobody knew anything about. It was Live Like a Suicide. And it was, 4 quote unquote live tracks, and that was it. And so, I purposely put them because they're big names now or a few years later. And obviously Black Sabbath was a huge name at the time, but releasing an album with Tony Martin and a bunch of other folks in the band.
Oh no, that wasn't Tony Martin. That was the Glenn
Nope.
Hughes album.
Shit, that wasn't even Tony Martin. Look at that.
Yep. That was that. It's not a bad album, but it's not a Black Sabbath album. But we've talked about that in a different episode. So.
Right. So yes. So and this was the year of your birth, 1986. That's so cool.
that is correct.
I was all of 17 years old at the time.
I was all of 0.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that happened in 1986 before we get to the albums that we're going to talk about. So I have a couple of notable things, and we always start to, we've been doing this since episode 3, where we're talking about dead people. All right, and I don't mean to sound flippant about it whatsoever. The third or fourth, I can't remember what episode it was. We did a show.
I think it was episode 3.
The episode, we did a show about musicians' deaths. It was, what a way to keep the good momentum going for a brand new show. But for this episode, we're talking about notable things that happened in 1986, and unfortunately, death is part of life, and so in 1986, 2 major deaths happened. Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy passed away that year, as well as Cliff Burton from Metallica. So those were 2 huge losses in the world of hard rock and heavy metal. But we did have some positive stuff, obviously, that happened that year. We had some new bands that were born. Cacophony came out that was formed that year. There wasn't any albums necessarily released by these bands, but they were formed that year. Cacophony, Dark Throne, and I'm only mentioning this band, Immolation, because they're from my hometown, Yonkers, New York. Manitoba's Wild Kingdom, which is former members of the Dictators. We've kind of talked about them before. Macaulay Schenker Band, or is the Macaulay Schenker Group, formed that year, MSG, another form or version of MSG. MOD, the side project from Billy Milano after SOD really didn't do anything, he created MOD, Method of Destruction. Pestilence, Skid Row came out, was born that year, and Sugar Ray. And Sugar Ray would not have any popularity till much
Sh-
later on.
Sugar Ray came out in 1986.
According to
That
the information I
that's
have.
wild. Like that. What?
Now, think about it. Iron Maiden was born in 1977, and no one knew about him for another 4 years.
Yeah, it's
Or
just
3 years.
Sugar Ray. I remember being popular. God, late 90s. So it took them a while, huh? God, even then it was like I'm looking now. It's like they took them 3 albums to really become much of anything,
Right.
and that was 1999. So that's I mean that shows some dedication there. So
Sure. I mean, it could have just been the fact that they started jamming in their garage and didn't really have a real band for 4 or 5 years. You never know.
it looks like they formed like played in reggae bands and stuff like that. Oh, I mean that makes sense, right? Their music kind of like that kind of stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
Let's just do the
Exactly.
whole episode on Sugar Ray now. So,
No, we're
the
not.
band's debut album. No,
All right. And some other big events that happened in 1986 to finish off the notable events. Jeff Dunn, or otherwise known as Mantis from Venom, quit the band. He left Venom and to pursue a solo career, I believe it was. And Jason Newsted joined Metallica just a few weeks after Cliff Burton's death because Metallica pressed on and they really never stopped. Right after that tour, they went back into the studio, they jammed and they recorded the 598 EP, did some more dates, and then came off the road and started working on Injustice for All. So it was a pretty wild time for Metallica. So we're going to talk probably a little bit about them later. um, anything else did you want to mention?
no, I was gonna say, Mantis, I believe, didn't last long. He was back in the band within just about a year or so. Um, but I mean, aside from that, yeah, I mean, like, I think it more speaks for itself. Like what the albums we're gonna talk about, and then we're gonna mention a few more at the end. So, probably best way to go about it.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just gonna mention a few now. We can probably mention a few later, but some lesser known maybe albums that came out at this time. Racer X came out with Street Lethal. You know, I'm big fan of some of the stuff like you mentioned Cacophony earlier. Some of these guys that never really put out like major albums, but um, are masters of their instrument. So it's always cool to see like among the masses, among the big albums that came out in this time. Sometimes you go, oh yeah, wow, that did come out at that around that time as well. One we've made constant jokes about, and it, I think it's warranted, but also there is some good music in between all the hilarity. Is Clovenhoof. Clovenhoof released Fighting Back, which I believe that one was a live album. So that's a band that I don't think they released 2 albums that had the same lineup. It was like a different singer every time, different, but if you're into kind of lesser known stuff and kind of like these oddities in the music scene, that one's a cool one. Manila Road, that's another band we really don't talk about much, but some very heavy stuff at the time. And Steeler released a new album that year. King Cobra. So if you were a fan of King Cobra, I think they were a band that was maybe a little bit underrated, and they released their second album, Thrill of a Lifetime. Kick-Axe, that's a band that I've been a big fan of since I was a little kid. And the reason for that was they had some songs that they had to release under a different name, but for the Transformers movie soundtrack, which coincidentally came out in 1986. Transformers the movie, if we remember some of we did an episode where we talked about um, uh, movie soundtracks, metal movie soundtracks. Well, Transformers the movie is my favorite because that is one of the things that really got me into metal since being just a little kid listening to heavy metal songs and watching robots beat each other up. That was one of the things that I was just blown away as a kid and thought was just awesome. Other ones would be Raven. Now, The Pack is Back, I would say, is one of their worst albums. It was where they really diverged from, kind of their speed metal sound and tried to be a bit more commercial.
Dude, I listened to that album the other day, like a week or so ago, because
Oh yeah.
I listened to a lot of albums that from 1986 in research for this episode. I threw it on in the
Okay.
background and stuff like that. And let me tell you, that album is horrible.
It's really bad.
I mean, I couldn't get through it because I got interrupted anyway. But I'm like, thank God someone interrupted me. And I pressed pause on this thing because you know, the first bunch of songs, it was so being having known Raven from back in the day
Hmm.
to hear them make such an attempt at being almost, I don't want to use the word poppy, but kind of poppy, you
No, it
know,
definitely was poppy. That album was a mistake.
and then trying to come up with these anthems that they weren't. It wasn't hard rock. It was just rock, obviously, but yeah, it was bad. I was like, oh my god, this is terrible.
A couple more. Bon Jovi released "Slippery When Wet." We recently talked about that one actually, so I'm not going to go into much detail there, but that is one of his biggest albums. Period. Um, so if you're familiar with Virgin Steel at all, you'll know Jack Starr. He left the band after some creative differences and formed Burning Star, or Jack Starr's Burning Star, as it's on some of the album covers. Um,
Oh,
so
it's still that way.
what's
It's
that? It's
it's
still
still
that
that
way?
way. Yes.
Gotcha. Well, I guess technically the band's name is Burning Star, but yeah, all the albums it looks like say Jack Starr's Burning Star. Now that being said, like I think he was the real driving force of the band, in my opinion. And I know they're still around and still doing their thing, but that's I don't know. It for me, it's not. It doesn't do anything for me. I think the lead singer's voice has become pretty bad. But as far as Burning Star, if you're a guitar aficionado, check them out because um, really cool stuff. It's not for the casual listener. You're not gonna find amazing hooks on there, but if you're a guitar guy, definitely check out Burning Star. And one that I wanted to mention, which I think really goes unnoticed, is Rhodes. That was Nick Menz's band in 1986, which is kind of interesting. So, like, I would say most people probably have not heard of it. So, check out Rhodes.
So one real quick thing. There was one band that came out with an album this year. It was called Warlock, or they are called Warlock, and everyone kind of knows who Warlock is. That's Doro Pesch. She's a German female singer, and that was her band. And in '87, she had a bigger hit with the song "All We Are." That came off of their Triumph from Steel album. Now, the reason why I'm bringing them up is because since we are talking about um, albums that came out that year and their name came up, I discovered just recently that the reason why Warlock, after that Triumph from Steel album came out in 1987, never released another album was that she had a manager that basically stole all her rights from her. So if she ever wanted to release music again as Warlock, she would have to basically pay this guy. And so she literally shut it down. And if I'm not mistaken, the Doro Pesh band is Warlock, but they cannot perform as or they couldn't perform as Warlock. And she didn't get this lawsuit basically settled until like the mid 2010s.
Oh wow.
it was over 20 years or something like that that she was not able to use pork. She has it back now because the guy died, and so she was able to negotiate or somehow just get
She was
the
able to negotiate with his corpse.
yeah, well, with the estate, and so it was just wild when I read this, and I just recently read this. So I never knew that. I was always kind of curious in the back of my mind as to
Yeah.
what happened to Warlock because I know Doro went solo after that, but it wasn't because she wanted to go solo; it's because she kind of had to. So it was interesting.
That makes sense.
Well, we have four albums that you're going to talk about, four albums that I'm going to talk about. And they're not necessarily our favorites, but they're notable albums that we're going to put a little bit more detail into than the rest of the albums that we just mentioned, and we're going to mention some more later on. So um do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I'll go first. That's fine.
Okay, you can go first.
All right. You said some of them aren't our favorites, and I would say some of them are for sure some of our favorites.
i'm
Um,
I'm not doubting that.
you're about to find out. Uh, so speaking of favorites, let's just say that. So this and one other album by this band are my two favorite albums, and I'm going to talk about "Rain and Blood" by Slayer. Now, obviously, three of the big four released albums this year in 1986, and one of the other member of the big four the following year. So this is huge. Slayer released Rain and Blood, which is their third album, and this was the one that really just blew everyone away. I think like it took them a little bit of time, and as much as the first two albums are great, this was the album that like I'd say it's pretty near perfection when it comes to a thrash metal album. The lyrical content, the instrumentation, the like the song structure themselves, everything to me is like nearly perfect. I mean, I listen to this album, I don't skip a song. Pretty much every song is a hit in my mind, at least as far as like a metal song goes. Angel of Death, I mean, what a way to start the album. It ends off with Raining Blood. Again, what a way to end the album. Everything in between, Piece by Piece, Necrophobic, Altar of Sacrifice, Jesus Saves, Criminally Insane, Reborn, Epidemic, Postmortem, all just absolutely amazing. This was my favorite era of the band as well. I mean, three albums back to back to me are just nearly perfection. You have Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, all with the same lineup of the band, which was Kerry King on guitars, Tom Mariah on bass and vocals, Jeff Hanneman on guitars, and Dave Lombardo on drums. Dave is my absolute favorite Slayer drummer. This album was released by Def Jam, as well as Geffen Records. Um, I mean, I think if you're a metal fan, you've probably heard about Rain and Blood 1,000 times. What is there more to say? But I always feel like there is just more to say because it's like I could talk about this album 100 times and never get bored of it.
This is my favorite Slayer album, hands down. And I used to listen to this album a lot. Now, mind you, it's a very quick, short album, so it's easy to do that because the songs just fly by, literally. They're
I
so
mean, it's
short
under
and quick.
30 minutes, so yeah,
Right, exactly.
it's a car
Um,
ride for me.
Angel of Death, one of those songs that for whatever reason, like I don't forget the lyrics to. um, Slayer, this album, I mean, I had already kind of heard about Slayer. I already had kind of had seen a lot of the stuff around town with Live Undead, the live album that had come out the year before this. They're because I was into Metallica, then you heard about Slayer and you heard about this upstart band Megadeth that had started the year before and where he came from, and you heard about Anthrax. They were gaining popularity with spreading the disease. So this album drops and it's just like holy shit. It's like, whoa, where did this thing come from? And
Yeah.
it just slapped you in the face, and it didn't stop slapping you until you started hearing the rain come down at the end and in the last song. I mean, I love this album. Like you said, you listen to every single song is great, and you just keep going through it. Over the years, I've come to the point where I just listen to Angel of Death and and Raining Blood. When I listen to Slayer, I'm gonna pick songs here and there that I like, only because for me, I can only listen to so much of this kind of music. Like I can only listen to so much Amon Amarth in a period of time. Otherwise, I really feel like my head is pounding. I can only listen to so much. Uh, you know, what is it? Melodic death metal. I can only listen to so much of all of that. Where then I have to get back into kind of like a groove and almost have to chillax after all that type of thing. So got to put in like mad season and just cool off. But anyhow, point being is, Slayer. This album is phenomenal, outstanding. Favorite Slayer album. Have the original pressing, but way back from 1986 on vinyl. It's amazing, amazing album.
100% agreed.
All right, so my first album that I'm going to talk about, we're just going to go in a completely different direction. We're going to go to prog metal. Um, I'm going to talk about Rage for Order from Queensryche. Everyone knows that's been listening to the show for a while. I'm a big Queensryche fan. The album released in June of 1986, came out on EMI America Records. It was produced by a guy named Neil Kernon. This is Queensryche's second full-length LP. This to me is much more aggressive than, or aggressive. This to me is much more progressive than The Warning was. This was definitely, you know, to use a pun, a progression from the first album to this one. You got some of that progressive style, on songs like NM 156 on The Warning. But then this album came out and it was just like all over the place progressive, and not even like in a metal kind of way. It was just really out there. And this album, I didn't get it at first, but I loved, Walk in the Shadows. I loved I Dream in Infrared. So it
Mm.
took me a while for me to get into songs like Screaming in Digital or New Regal or even Surgical Strike. That song, as cool as it is, it didn't really register with me for such a long time. But recently I've really gotten into Surgical Strike. Ever since they started playing it with Todd La Torre, I've really gotten into that song. And the rest of the album, songs like Screaming in Digital and London, they've all grown on me. I really, really appreciate this album. Although I gotta say, the one song that really just has never done it for me is "Gonna Get Close to You," which is a cover song. I, although the hook gets stuck in my head from time to time when I listen to it because it plays in the background. That's one of those songs I just I don't I don't really like. One thing I do want to say about this album is that, as one of the singles that they released in the 90s with this album, um, and I say it that way because it was the 1991 acoustic remix of the song "I Dream in Infrared" that came out on a B-side for one of those singles. I think it was on Empire. I don't know if it was an actual single for Empire or another one song from that album, but they released this acoustic version. Amazing. I love it. I think it's better than the actual song that's on the album, but people may argue with me about that. What do you think about this? Because I know you've been listening to this a little bit more since you've gotten into Queensryche over the years.
Yeah, I mean this is my favorite Queensryche album. I mean, we've talked about it a bit before. Walk in the Shadows is one of my favorite songs of theirs. I really love Surgical Strike as well. That one was one that you said it took kind of a while to get into it, but I liked it from the very beginning. That was a pretty fast song, very heavy riff. Has really cool like solo that they kind of paired with orchestrals. Like to me, if it almost feels like a Joey Belladonna Anthrax song. So it like for me that's like right on track, you know. I like the song Neue Regel. Um and then Chemical Youth I thought was really cool. London, you know, not as much, you know, another kind of one of ballads. I'm not as big on the ballads as a whole, even though they have some pretty strong ones. And you know, I like the themes of it. Like I love how it's about technology kind of like ruling our lives and things like that, which is very, you know, topical today. And so I love the conceptual approach. You know, I would say this to me is the peak of the Jeff Tate era. I know, you know, not everybody's going to agree with that, but I think it's certainly up for contention with that.
I could see that just because of the way he was handling his voice on this, and a lot of the screaming he did all over this album.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of people are going to say obviously Operation Mindcrime or Empire, but for me, like I think this is my favorite album of theirs.
Oh no, I can understand that, and I'm just the Jeff Chait thing. I think when you say he was at his peak at this album was because he was definitely doing a lot of different things that he shies away from now. Like,
Yeah.
and you can see as each album progresses, he does less and less and less of that, and even does less of it on Operation Mindcrime. You know, Mindcrime, the awesome stuff about that is just the storytelling and the whole concept behind it, really.
hmm
Um, but vocally, he's all over the place on this one, and he's just ripping vocals left and right.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's very impressive. Like obviously, like he's younger, so he hasn't strained his voice. He hasn't done a lot of things, but like the vocal techniques that he used back then, and like that era through, I would say Empire. You know, that's really his peak era. And, I don't think anything that came after it was nearly as strong. But I mean, even today, he's a great vocalist, no doubt.
Yes, he is, but he's not the same as he used to be.
Yeah, who is?
I tell you what, I heard the new Judas Priest single today, and it is pretty. You know, you hear Rob still screaming at that age, and I was like, you know what,
Oh,
he
I
can still
know
do it.
Rob is insane. He really is. I haven't heard the single. I didn't even know it came out today, so I'm gonna have to listen to it.
Actually, came out Friday, and it's really really good. So I like it a lot.
You like it
One
better than the last one that they released?
Crown of Horns, yes, I
Yeah.
like it. I like it
Okay.
more than Crown of Horns.
Crown of Horde so far is my least favorite. So, and I didn't hate it by any means. So like so far I'm loving everything they're releasing for this album. So.
Cool. Me too. Real quick note on this Queensryche thing. For those of you listening to this episode, check on social media. I'm going to put out a surprise for you guys because I'm I'm going to put a picture of me when I went to my prom, and it's going to look a lot like a couple of people on the back cover of this Queensryche album. So look out for that when you get a chance. Um, and another quick note: Arch Enemy covered "Walk in the Shadows," which is an amazingly different version.
You know, it's all right. I prefer the original for sure, even though I am a fan of Arch Enemy, maybe not in their current incarnation. But is over the years I've been a fan of Arch Enemy. And it's an interesting cover for sure. Definitely check it out.
All right, what's your next album?
So I'm going to talk about Sugar Ray. No, I'm kidding. So I'm going to talk about Seventh Star by Black Sabbath. No, again, I'm kidding. Let's talk about one that I've probably talked about a lot. Somewhere in Time by Iron Maiden. So at any given time, this could be my favorite Iron Maiden album, because it alternates between that and Number of the Beast. And the reason being is I just sometimes feel a bit heavier than others, and sometimes I want to listen to Somewhere in Time, and I find that at any given moment, Wasted Years is, you know, my favorite song, and then other times it's Hallowed Be Thy Name. So, you know, it just depends on my mood. So one thing that I can say about Somewhere in Time is it has some amazing riffs. This was the kind of the era where Adrian Smith, is becoming a little bit more confident. He's adding some songs into the mix, like "Wasted Years," like I said. Um, this album has, uh, "Caught Somewhere in Time," which is a huge hit. "Sea of Madness," which people love. "Heaven Can Wait." "Stranger in a Strange Land," obviously big one. "Alexander the Great," I am so excited to hear live for the first time. They're just doing it now for this newest tour, and I have a lifelong love for "The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner." Um, you know, this was still in the peak years of Iron Maiden before the band kind of started to split with No Prayer for the Dying. So you've got the classic lineup, which is Bruce Dickinson on lead vocals, Dave Murray on guitars, Adrian Smith on guitars, Steve Harris on bass, and Nico McBrain on drums. I would say most people would consider that to be, the peak era of the band, even though I'm going to say I have always loved Clive Burr's drums, and I will, as much as I love Nico, Clive is always my favorite drummer for Iron Maiden. But this was a really different album as far as they started adding some guitar synthesizers, bass synthesizers, and it's a departure for some people, like you've mentioned in the past, Kenneth, that you're, is not as big of a fan of the album. But even now, like when they play the songs, they're great to hear live. They don't really use the synthesizers anymore. For me, that was never something that bothered me. I enjoyed it. One thing that's also really cool about this album, if you get time to look at it, is the cover. It's got lots and lots of Easter eggs, including even Batman's on it, somewhere hidden. So, take a look at it, see all the Easter eggs you can find, and then you can go on Google and see, what Easter eggs you missed. That's always a really cool thing. And yeah, like I just absolutely love this album. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but still from the peak era of this band.
Yeah, I agree that it's a good album. Um, I've never well, let me correct that. It's definitely a good album, and it's not one of my favorites by any means. Um, in fact, when it came out, I think the biggest thing that really got me was the guitar synths, because it was so funny. Just 2 years prior, there was a documentary that came out on MTV, that was called Iron Maiden Behind the Iron Curtain, and they were they began the Power Slave World Slavery Tour in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, that at the time was still um, kind of under Soviet rule. Or for those people out there who don't know, Russia used to be called the Soviet Union. So they were communist, even though technically they say today they're not. Yeah, we know that's not true. Anyhow, so I think they were in Warsaw, Poland at the time, and they were at a party. And some guy says to Bruce Dickinson, they're playing music really loud. He goes, he says to Bruce, he goes, "I want to play heavy metal with keyboards." And Bruce Dickinson turns around and says, "You can't play heavy metal with keyboards." Right. And that was my terrible Bruce Dickinson accent. And Lord knows, 2 years later, they're fucking using guitar synths and keyboards. And it was just like, what the fuck is going on with Iron Maiden? But cannot deny, the songs are good. Okay. I love Caught Somewhere Time. I love Wasted Years. It's a great song. There's a lot of, now that I'm older, that song has such deeper meaning to me. It's incredible. Um, Stranger in a Strange Land, I can deal with. It's a cool little mid-paced song, but I can give take it or leave it, really. Heaven Can Wait's okay. I like that song. The albums for me was a mixed bag. Um, I was, for me coming off of Power Slave, this was to me a major disappointment. It did not have the impact on me personally that Power Slave had or Peace of Mind had, but it's still, when you look back on it now, you can see that it's a very good album. I, Alexander the Great, can't wait to see it later this year when we go to see Maiden up in Dallas. That's going to be awesome.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I'll give it. It's one of their classic albums for sure. It's not one of my favorites. I know it's one of yours though.
Yep, between the two, like I said,
And I'm
it's
looking
one.
at the album cover. Can't find Batman.
I thought you have to open it for the full, like when you flip it open, and it's
Well,
got like the full like fold out.
well, the original doesn't fold out, so I can turn it sideways and look at, I could turn it around and look at the backside.
Oh, that was just on the CD, I guess.
Yeah, and the CD you can open it all up, but
And it might be on the backside. He's on a rooftop.
oh, he's on a rooftop, is he?
Yes. He's not just standing.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see him now. Okay, I mean it's an image of what you would think is Batman. It's
Pretty much,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a cool album cover. I remember when I first got it, I was just looking all over the place for all the cool little Easter eggs, which back then when I was a kid was not called Easter eggs. It was called something else. I didn't hear about Easter eggs until DVDs became a thing.
I think that's when the term really became big, yeah.
So I mean, like I said, it's not one of my favorites. I do like the album.
I'm
don't take
taking
that away
offense.
from. All right, well, fine. If you're gonna take offense, and I'm gonna give you something that you didn't necessarily want to listen to. All
What,
right,
poison?
Poison. Look what the cat dragged in. That came out on May 23rd, 1986, on Enigma Records. It was produced by a guy named Rick Brody or Browdy. I can't say. I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly because I don't know who he is. Although he did do a lot of hair metal bands in the 80s before they were called hair metal bands. It's Poison's debut album, and I gotta say, it is probably the ultimate glam cover and glam album that came out in the 80s. Um, you look at the cover and you cannot tell. Yeah, androgynous is exactly the word that comes to mind when you see this album cover. But let's get past the cover. Let's get to the music. This album was a triple platinum success, but it didn't start out that way. They wanted the song Cry Tough, or the record company wanted the band to release the song Cry Tough. They did that as a single. The first single, it didn't do anything. And somewhere along the way, someone had the bright idea of, let's release Talk Dirty to Me as a single. And they did a video for it. It exploded. And it kind of took the record company by surprise because they didn't really think it was going to do anything. But then it did. And then from there, I Want Action became a big single. And then the ballad, or I wouldn't even call it a ballad. It's just a slower song. It's a power ballad of the album, but it was before Every Rose Has Its Thorn. The song I Won't Forget You, which just took off. It was big. I mean, I Won't Forget You peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Talk Dirty to Me, for what it's worth, peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. So, I mean, Talk Dirty to Me to me is the epitome of 80s glam metal. I mean, this whole album to me is like the epitome of 80s glam metal, more so than anything Motley Crue did. Because Motley Crue, it to me is the epitome of sleaze metal that came out in the 80s. And then you got Poison, which was a true, basically glam metal band to me. Um, this album played constantly on my new car that I got in the summer of 1986. So, yeah, this I know you don't have too much of a high opinion on this album.
On Poison.
Yeah,
Um,
Poison or this album.
so here's my question: you look at the album cover. Who's the best looking lady?
It's not Bobby Doll, I tell you
It's
that
not
much.
Bobby Doll.
I mean, it's probably between CC DeVille and Ricky Rocket.
They look the most like women. Yeah. All right. So I will say this: "Talk Dirty to Me" is one of, if not my favorite Poison song. I think it's it's a good song, no doubt. I'm not as big of like I'm not on the into the really glammy stuff. So it's hard for me to really get into it. But that being said, I mean, obviously this is a pretty landmark album for the band. What's interesting to me about Poison was, a lot of the stuff was starting to gear towards obviously like grunge music, etc. Like even at that time, right? Thrash is coming out and really making its like biggest albums. Obviously, we're talking about a bunch of them today. And then, glam is kind of starting to go away, but for some reason, Poison just managed to stay alive in the glam scene. I think they were just so like, you know, um what's the word? Like they just had the right vibe for the time, I think. And it worked for them. Obviously things, by 1993 things shifted a little bit. But that little pocket of time, from now until, around 93, they managed to kind of like outlive some of the other glam bands that were already making changes. So no, so I was just, as much as I'm not a big fan of him, I can still, appreciate that they had that little, pocket of time that they were just a big band.
I mean, I kind of have to disagree a little bit about the fact that you thought that glam metal was going down. I think at this point, 1986, between 85 to 89 was the peak years of glam metal, in my opinion, just growing up in that scene. I mean,
Yeah, I got you.
a lot of stuff starting to come up in 83, 84. But, obviously, Motley Crue with Theater of Pain in 85, or was that 84? No, that was 85. Um, and then, they came out with Girls in 87, but, Poison, they come out with this album and then open up and say, 2 years later in 1988, that album was even bigger than this one. And that, that was when power ballads really hooked people in. Because Home Sweet Home, it's funny when you listen to Home Sweet Home from Motley Crue, that was the start of the power ballad era. But in reality, it's not a super sappy song,
Hmm.
although lyrically you can say that, but I mean, it's got a tempo to it that's a little bit quicker than most ballads,
Yeah.
right? And um, but to me, the peak ballad, it was Every Rose Has Its Thorn that came out on Open Up and Say 2 years later. That to me that
No,
was
I
the ballad.
so to be clear, what I was saying was that they managed to like 90, 91, they
Mhm,
were
yeah.
still big.
Oh yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
other bands were already shifting away from that. They were still managing to stay big in the like there was no real glam scene as much anymore. But they didn't care. They were just like we're doing our thing.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with.
That's kind of what I was getting at more was not that they were making that shift at this time, but I was talking about like them as a whole as a band.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, 1990, 91 was definitely the death knell of glam metal.
Yeah,
As,
but like Unskinny Bop was a freaking huge hit
right, it was.
in a time when like people weren't as into that, like so it's interesting to me.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, Flesh and Blood came out in 1990, and it had some good tracks on it. There was still grunge as it was born in 1990. Well, it was born before that, but in terms of
Mhm.
popularity and really coming out, obviously, it wasn't until September of 91 where Nevermind, not Nevermind, yeah, Nevermind, right? When that came out, but it was obviously those bands, Alice in Chains already existed, Soundgarden already existed, Nirvana already existed, but nobody really knew too much about them. So I guess we'd say the underground was starting to bubble over,
Hmm.
and so yeah, 1990 is when it was the crossover period where new bands were forming, legend bands or legacy bands or veteran bands were wallowing in the mire, if you put it that way, because
Yeah.
they were didn't know which direction to go in, because for lack of a better term, they were running out of ideas. People were not going to see a lot of these shows anymore because they were kind of over it, and they wanted something new. Fans wanted something new, but fans still wanted to be entertained. So there's that kind of balance that a lot of bands didn't do. But you know, Poison, yes, you're correct in that they were able to kind of maintain that popularity through the early '90s. Then when the band lineup changes with CC and all that stuff, that's when things kind of went a little different for them. But
I mean, like think about this. Like the last single that was released for Flesh and Blood was in July of 1991, and then in September of 1991 was Smells Like Teen Spirit. And like, is that not like a nail in the coffin? Like,
right, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what it was. I mean, you basically had the one door closed and the other one open.
hmm.
All right, so what's your third album?
My third album is going to be Epicus Doomicus Metallicus from Candlemass. So a little silly name, but this is a major landmark album in the world of doom metal. We don't talk a whole lot about doom metal because neither of us are really big fans of it per se. But this is a really impressive album. It's something very different than a lot of the stuff that was coming out at the time. And so I think it's inspired a ton of bands, stuff that has come out. Like I think obviously, like you take the like gloomy doom kind of stuff of the early Black Sabbath, but bands like Candlemass really took that and ran with it and took it like to the next level. Whereas Black Sabbath, did those things early on, but they really changed their style over time. you know, by the time Dio was in the band, they were playing more heavy, like heavy metal. So there was a pocket or the pocket's not the right word. There's a void, and bands like Candlemass really filled that. And so like this album, what's interesting is like they didn't really have a full band at the time. They had a bassist, a rhythm guitarist, and a drummer, and they had a guest musician play for the vocals. They had a guest lead guitar. They had guest guitar. They had guest backing vocals. So it's interesting that this has become as big as it is because in the next year, when they released, their next few albums after, they had Messiah Markolin as their vocalist, which was their longtime vocalist for many albums. But in this one, they had Johan Lankvist, who was now, or I believe he's in the band now, which is kind of interesting that they kind of went full circle. It took years and years and years for this guy who was on, their not their biggest release per se, but like one of the landmark albums. And he was in the band from 1984, or sorry, 1986, and that was it. And then 2018 to present, like that's a gap.
Yeah, you think?
I gave this a listen ahead of time to kind of go over it and make sure I was getting the full idea. And like I said, while this isn't really my style, like I really actually did enjoy it to a degree. Solitude was a really cool intro. Demon's Gate, I think, was probably my favorite song that I listened to. That one was the longest on the album, so go figure. Crystal Ball, pretty cool. I really liked Sorcerer's Pledge, which was the last song on the album. It's only 6 songs, but it's a 42-minute album. for me, like listening to something that's very doomy and gloomy for 40 minutes is maybe a little tough, but I really did appreciate it because it's like it's not like super depressive per se, but it does have that like doom, like baritone kind of style. Like it's real dark and and moody, foreboding. It gets you in a certain mood. It gets you in a vibe. So like, if that's your thing, like this is a landmark album. It's pretty awesome.
I must say that I don't know anything about Candlemass. I know that they were doom metal, and it's unfortunate that I don't because it was just not something that I ever got into. But just glossing over some of the things that I see about this record, um, you know, them being a Swedish band, it's interesting in that Celtic Frost, also being from out that way, they as much as they were a heavy metal band or one of the early black metal bands, although they didn't play it in the black metal style, they were kind of doomy when you think about some of the stuff that they put out because i- they eventually became known as avant-garde metal, but it was so different. Like yes, they've Celtic Frost has Circle of the Tyrant, or and then they have songs like Morbid Tales, but then there was other things that were just really dark and really moody. I don't want to say gloomy, but moody. And so they would cross that line between the two genres. And so it's just interesting. Must be the long winters over in that part of the world. But yeah, I mean, you think about a whole entire genre is named after this album title. So
Yeah,
it's
epic doom metal. Yeah.
yeah, epic doom metal. I mean, it's pretty cool. I mean, the fact that there's a whole genre based upon essentially, yeah, Black Sabbath kind of started it, but Black Sabbath it wasn't really to me. It wasn't doomy and gloomy so much as it
The
was just
first album, not all of it, but like certain songs, like NIB.
but
And
NIB to me is I don't want to say upbeat, but like there's certain like I'm trying to think what song it is. And I just threw an extra note in there by accident. I forgot what song it is, but there's the 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 way I look at it is people expanded on the slow heaviness of Black Sabbath and created.
Witchfinder General, Pentagram, bands like that, like
Mhm.
they took a lot from there and then brought in like operatic singing, the slower pace, like really emphasizing certain aspects of those bands that came before them, but like not mimicking, just it's like anything we've talked about with bands, like these offshoots that come from it. They like pick a style or something about a band that they like, and they're like, let's focus on this, and it evolves into a new style. And that's essentially what they did with this album.
Oh yeah, and since you mentioned Witchfinder General, on Record Store Day they're re-releasing their debut album, Death Penalty.
Okay.
So I'll get that information. We'll remind everyone later. But yeah, I'm gonna give this a spin probably tomorrow morning on my way to work. Well, maybe not on my way to work. Well, it's probably better on my way to work because if I do it on my way home, I'm gonna fall asleep on my way home. At least I got coffee in the morning with me.
Just, if it's too depressing, don't, come into the office all doomy and gloomy.
I don't want to be here. At least tomorrow's Friday.
Uh, That being said, yes.
All right. Next up for me, speaking of doomy and gloomy, The Dark from Metal Church. They're not doomy and gloomy, but the album title is The Dark. So this is Metal Church's second album, released in October 6th of '86 on Elektra Asylum Records. It's produced by a guy named Mark Dodson, and we'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. Um, so this is the follow up to their really really good awesome debut album, and if you take the first half of the album and that was all you heard, it would be like a really great follow-up EP. The second half of the album basically sounds like a band that has lost their way. Sounds like a band that doesn't know what a good hook is. They got some good riffs, but the hooks are not really there. What happened was there was a lot of turmoil in the band, and they were getting pulled in different directions in terms of their musicality and not musicality in terms of their musical direction, and they literally lost the hook. I mean, the first half of the album, great. But somehow it was like they got a riff and they just would not get away from the riff, and the riff wasn't necessarily a hooky riff, it was just a good riff. I don't know, the performance suffered, the energy was low. There was something, I don't know if it was something had to do with Dave Wayne, maybe on his way out at that point. Who knows what the deal is? But there was lots of things that kind of went in a different direction. Had it, the first 4 songs, I mean, when you talk about, Ton of Bricks, um, Start the Fire, Watch the Children Pray, those are great songs. I mean, when we went to see them, several months ago, they played all 3 of those songs. Am I wrong? Right? They played Watch the Children Pray.
I know they played "Watch the Children Pray" for
They
sure.
definitely played, Start the Fire.
They
They
did.
they
Yes,
may not have done Ton of Bricks, but we can check
I
the
think they did though.
I think
I mean,
I think they did too. But that's the thing, so you've got those songs, the first half of the album, but on the second half, it was just, what the hell happened? I mean, it's like the tale of two bands. Um, and when I was talking about the producer Mark Dodson, so Mark Dodson ended up producing "State of Euphoria" from Anthrax. So here's the funny thing about that: um, Metal Church thrash band, right? Anthrax thrash band. Now, Metal Church comes out with this album, and it caught the ear of Scott Ian. But one thing about this album that's so not what you expect is it is a slickly produced album for a thrash band. And I think that's another reason that I don't personally think it's as good as it can be, because part of thrash, and I don't know, I mean, I think James Hetfield hits it on the nose. He loves to sing with his vocals really dry. I mean, and Justice for All, the whole album is so dry that if after one listen, you have to go to the fridge and grab a glass of water because you're parched. Um, Saint Anger, the vocals were really dry. They've perfected it with Rick Rubin, kind of with Death Magnetic, and then Greg Fiddleman doing the last couple albums. They've perfected their sound to some degrees, so it still comes across dry, but it doesn't have that really stripped sound. Metal Church, the first album, was really well produced, in that regards. Even though it was like a high end demo, it sounded good. But man, the slick production of thrash metal, just the two don't mix very well. And this had that slick production. Scott Ian did that, and they didn't come across the same way. State of Euphoria doesn't have that slick production. But I guess Mark Dawson tried to do that, and I don't know. Uh, something didn't work. I mean, between the fact that they had to rush the album out, but I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't, as everyone hears this show from time to time, I love music production, and I'm more attuned to the dry side of things than the slick side of things. And I listen to some of the slicker Ozzy albums, and I'm like, oof, I wish it would sound like Blizzard of Oz, or I wish it would sound like Diary of a Madman, you know, rather than say, uh, No More Tears. No More Tears, good album, but to me, it's too slick. But
I
whatever.
can't listen to "No More Tears" anymore. I even like when the song itself comes on. I've always liked it. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. I just like I feel like I don't ever have to hear it again.
I don't know. It's something about that album. I mean, I like the song "No More Tears," but Mr. Tinker Train. If I don't know, there's something about that album is kind of weird. I know what you mean. So,
Yeah, I'm like over it.
all right.
And it's not even like I hate it or anything. It's just like I don't know. I don't really care.
All right. So, what are your thoughts on the Metal Church album?
I mean, like you said, the first few songs in the album are really good. For me, it took a while to kind of get into the David Wayne era of the band. Because I mostly liked, Mike Howe's vocals. But I think going to see them live also kind of helped with some of that for me too. Like, I've always, you know, I've liked the first album. I think Metal Church, from 1984 is a great album. Um, the Dark never really did a whole lot for me, but I think, like I said, hearing them live, excuse me, hold on. I think hearing them live, like it kind of impressed me. Start the Fire was really cool, ton of bricks, and then Watch the Children Pray. I believe those were the three that they played from the Dark. So you're right though. The second half of the album kind of directionless. Not very impressive. But that being said, like the first half's really good, and it gave me a lot more respect for that era of the band.
So, Ton of Bricks and Start the Fire started the show
Yeah,
for yeah, and then
those for sure. Yeah.
yeah, and then Watch the Children Pray came up later on. So yeah, I mean, oh, I think they did they do Burial at Sea? Yes, they also did Burial at Sea. So that's one of the songs on the second half of the album that they still continue to play. Don't get me wrong. When I say that the second album, like you said, it was directionless. So
It's
there
not
are
bad. It's
right.
just not as focused.
I mean, like I don't understand why Stone Sour did a cover of The Dark. I think there's better songs in this album to do covers of. But then again, you choose a cover not necessarily based on the fact that you like the song, but hey, sometimes there's everyone can like the song that they choose to like. But I think there's better songs to choose from that are, that you can like. But yeah, so they still play Burial at Sea. Heavy riff, but I personally think that song could have not been played and something else could have played. All right.
I mean, maybe some more of the Mike Howe era stuff. Like they played Fake Healer, they played
Yeah.
Badlands, but I think that was it from his era.
No. Fake Healer, Badlands, uh, Psycho. Was that a new song?
Was Psychos from this album from
All
from
right. So
from the
from
Dark?
oh, is it?
Mm-hmm. It's on the second half of the album.
Oh, Jesus. So they played two songs from the second half of the album. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. See, there's good riffs. Like I said, there's good riffs on those songs. I just don't think those songs go anywhere. Like you think about Ton of Bricks and Start the Fire, and then you look at Psycho and you're like, is it this? I don't know. It doesn't do the same thing for me. Riffs are great, but I don't know. I feel like I've just contradicted myself because they played two songs from the second half and three songs from the first half.
Yeah.
But in reality, I don't necessarily like the second half of the album as much as I like the first half. That's just it.
Fair enough.
All right. So what do you got for your last album tonight?
So I'm sure you can guess. But my last album for the night, sorry. Well, my last album I'm gonna go over is Peace Sells, but Who's Buying by Megadeth. I think it's fitting, to be one of the last ones we talk about because it is probably, you know, the second biggest album of that year, realistically, as far as metal goes. The first album from Megadeth didn't do so great. It's kind of, eh, it's an all right album. It's not nearly as good as the stuff that followed. But this is where really when Dave kind of got his shit together. Um, you know, they had Gar Samuelson on drums, Chris Poland on lead and rhythm guitars, David Ellefson on bass, and Dave Mustaine on lead and rhythm guitars. This album is another one that I can listen to from beginning to end without skipping anything. Wake Up Dead is an absolutely awesome opening. I can kind of relate to it, and not in the cheating part of the song, but certainly the thinking that somebody that I'm sleeping with is going to kill me. Um, I can elaborate on that story if you'd like to hear it. But the Conjuring, I think, is an awesome track. Peace Cells, obviously amazing, like one of my favorite Megadeth songs of all time. Also, one of the first songs that I heard from the band that really just like I was hooked. Devil's Island, amazing song to end the first half on. Good Morning Black Friday, love it. Bad Omen, I Ain't Superstitious, and My Last Words. I mean, like 8 songs that I just absolutely dig. Like I still listen to this album from time to time, and like I said, don't even skip a song on it. Um, this is probably my second favorite Megadeth album, and it's hard for me sometimes to kind of like go between that and Rest in Peace. I think Rest in Peace is obviously like a much bigger album. It's a little bit slicker, and I think that's why I kind of teeter between that and Peace Cells, because Peace Cells still like I love Chris Poland's work. Like that era of the band has a very distinct sound. This is really when they, like I said, when they got things together. It's a huge step up. Like they originally started recording it for Combat, and then Capitol Records bought the rights to it so that they could release it. Obviously, they had faith in the band by hearing what they were putting together. Um, you know, and this was like Megadeth becoming Megadeth. So, um, yeah, I mean it's a huge album. I think it's easily debatable. Like some people will say this is their favorite Megadeth album of all time. I think it's totally warranted.
I mean, I can understand that, and I can see that side of the story for it, or hear that side of the argument. Um, I like the album a lot. It's not my favorite Megadeth album. I mean, my favorite Megadeth album actually is Countdown to Extinction, and I think that's the first one I really knew from beginning to end. Although I knew this one beginning to end, but it was things like I ain't superstitious. Okay, over the years, let me put it this way: Megadeth has covered some odd songs. So this is, their second album. They put I ain't superstitious, a Willie Dixon blues song, and they really, I mean, thrash music wasn't
Maybe it's a
known.
Howlin' Wolf song
Well, it was written by Willie Dixon.
for Howlin' Wolf. Yeah.
But regardless, it's still a heavy duty blues song. And for it to be r- covered by a thrash band, not just a thrash band, a band that was still establishing themselves in the world of metal. Not everyone can sit there and say, "Oh, I'm going to go ahead and do a blues song on my next album," because it doesn't
It's
come across
ballsy.
the same. No, it's super ballsy, and they changed it. Not didn't change it, but they just made it so a thrashy song. You know, I think there could have probably been better choices. Sort of like I didn't understand the need for them to do Anarchy in the UK on the next album. Okay, or what the hell were they doing These Boots Were Made for Walking on the first album? I mean, it's just their choice of covers for the first 3 albums are really unique. And does it work for them? I don't necessarily think it works for them, but it does establish them as a band that for as serious as Dave is, has a sense of humor. It's a sinister sense of humor, but it's a sense of humor nonetheless. You know, it's just strange to me. However, Wake
I
Up Dead.
really like this cover though. Like I love the way it starts, especially like the dum dum dum. Like it's just so cool. Like to me, it's very iconic, and it's a short cover too,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
and
No,
then like 2 minutes long.
it's
Yeah. So
246. But yeah, like I say, it's definitely unique, and they made it their own. But I think, to me, the highlights of this album are Wake Up Dead, The Conjuring, and Peace Cells. The whole first side is awesome. Um, Wake Up Dead is such a cool song. Um, well, shit, Lamb of God and Megadeth just covered it last year, or was it 2 years ago? Something like that. They did a cover of it, and
I don't know. Time goes way
I
too
know.
fast now.
I tell you, it's probably yes, 2 years ago. Um, killer. I mean, killer version. And it was Megadeth with Randy Blythe and Lamb of God, so that's pretty cool. But I mean, I love this version. I have this on vinyl. Peace Sells. I mean, absolutely one of the most memorable bass lines out there. Awesome, awesome song, and I loved with the first two albums how they had those um the titles that you can mess around with. Killing is my business and business is good, right? Now you got peace sells, but who's buying? It I mean, Dave was unique in that regards and coming up with some really cool titles of songs and albums. Um, Side two, probably not as strong as side one, but still strong enough to carry the album. So I thought it was a good album. I mean, I'm not going to take away anything from Megadeth. Um, for the three albums, or if you want to put it this way, for the four albums that came out in a year span by the Big Four, it still would be my least favorite. So it's unfortunate in that regards. But
Oh wow. Yeah, it's definitely not my least favorite.
I mean,
It's my second favorite.
of the Big Four, I'm going to sit there and say it is my least favorite. So obviously, we're going to talk about this right now. Master of Puppets from Metallica is my favorite. Anthrax is Among the Living that came out in early '97 was my second favorite of the Big Four in that 12-month period, right? And
Mhm.
then Slayer would be right behind it, and then Megadeth. Now that's not to say that I did not listen to all four of these albums incessantly. I tell you that. I listened to all four of these albums like crazy. But
No,
I was
I mean, I think there it would be foolish to think like you didn't enjoy them. I mean, or any of them. I mean, all four are absolutely great albums. I just try to think of it like, you know, which ones did I listen to the most? I mean, Anthrax was the least for me.
oh,
Um,
and
which
part of Anthrax, I mean, they were a New York band, so
yeah.
there was that kind of pride in this band, and then discovering like I didn't know anything about moshing, so when I'm reading the lyrics and it says mosh part, I'm like what the fuck is that? I didn't know anything. I was a fucking hermit in my in high school, for the most part. So not that I not that I not on purpose. It wasn't really. I didn't stay in my house. I was always out with my friends, but we weren't. It wasn't like a group of headbangers. We ranged from, you know, uh, preteen kids all the way up to, kids that were out of high school. If you want to call them kids, they were basically adults at that point. That's the group of people that I hung out with in my neighborhood, and we all listened to all sorts of different kinds of music, mostly metal. It wasn't one of those things where we were just standing around and maybe drinking a beer in the corner. You couldn't do that because you get in trouble. But we were around, playing stickball, playing tag, not flag football, but touch two-hand touch football. We were always active rather than just standing around listening to a boombox. So that was a big difference for me growing up.
You didn't have the cardboard box out there doing
The air guitar? No, I didn't. Not not at all. So, you know, um, so I took more pride, I guess, with the New York band of Anthrax, but I still like the album better than Megadeth. I liked it better than Slayer's.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
we all have a taste, right? Like, yeah, I mean,
mhm.
I think for me, I mean, I say obviously. For me, it's Metallica. I mean, that's my favorite Metallica album by far, Master of Puppets. And then eh, it's tough. Like, I would say Megadeth is still probably my second favorite of that year, and then Slayer, and then Anthrax. It's like I really only recently got into Anthrax at all, and then I mean Slayer. I love that album. It's tough. Like it might be a toss up between Slayer and Megadeth being like number two. Because I mean, the older I get, the more I love that Slayer album too. Uh, it's tough, but like I said, like sometimes my mood changes, so it may switch from day to day. But like Master Puppets just obviously a massive album, and you're going to talk about it next, so might as
Yes,
well start that.
yes, Master of Puppets released March 3rd, so it was the first of the four albums to come out. And think about that, you're like, wow, how do we compete with this? But at the same time, when you think about it, Megadeth wasn't in the studio. Well, they may have heard it before they went in the studio. I mean, think about, let's see, that came out in September. They started recording in February and March of '86. So they're in the studio at the time this comes out. So they're probably kind of like, damn it, or they couldn't come up with a follow up or something to say, oh shit, they did this, and let's try this. It was more like a reaction after that. Um, but regardless, came out March 3rd, 1986 on Elektra Records, produced by Metallica and Fleming Rasmussen. Uh, Coincidentally enough, it was mixed by Michael Wagner, which is interesting. Michael has been known to work with Accept, Motley Crue, Doc, and Overkill, and then later on, after Master of Puppets, they worked with Megadeth, Saigon Kick, and Skid Row. So, what else can we say about this album that hasn't already been said? This is a masterpiece of metal music. This is everyone talks about it being a thrash masterpiece. Again, I've said this constantly. Metallica stopped being a thrash band on Ride the Lightning. They were elements that they used when you think about it, but songs like For Whom the Bell Tolls is not thrash. Song like Fade to Black is not thrash. Okay. For whoever wants to argue with me, we can argue about it all day long. Okay. Um, a
Just
song.
email us at debatingmetal at gmail. No.
Exactly. Email us and give me your argument, and I'll write you back. Um, but I mean, yes, a song like Creeping Death. But even then, when you think about, like, to me, Battery is a thrash song, but not even Master of Puppets. When you think about how they played, like, Battery, yes, it has all the elements. It has the thrash drum beat. It has the speed and all that stuff. But when you start thinking about Master of Puppets, I mean, it's on Stranger Things now, and when you listen to it, it really doesn't come across as a thrash song. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about it differently. I don't know, but regardless, it is. You have Master Puppets, you have Battery. I mean, I'm sorry, is the thing that should not be a thrash song? No, that's one heavy, sludgy song. Welcome Home Sanitarium is not a thrash song, but damn good song. When you go to side two and you start, you listen to Disposable Heroes, yes, thrash song. Okay. But Leper Messiah, well, if I'm not mistaken, that is a foray into progressiveness that most people didn't really understand at the time. I don't think Metallica had done anything with odd time signatures up until that point.
I'm just picturing somebody listening to it like, I don't understand.
But Leper Messiah was a completely different song, thrashy, but completely different. I mean, that's a progressive song if I ever heard one at that point. Orion, it goes into lots of different territories. Most of it not really thrashy, and then of course Damage Incorporated, is a very thrash song. So they were. I mean, fuck, those are eight great songs, and uh, and even now, like, I appreciate Orion so much more now than I have in the past. Like, I literally ignored that song for so many years, and didn't really understand the magnitude and the incredible songwriting that went into that song. I didn't understand it for many, 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 many years, but you would think about it now, and it's just like, oh my god, what a fucking piece of work that song is, you know, especially considering it was written on the bass. So think about that too. Anyhow, like I said, what else can be said about it? Someone's going to sit there and say you're fucking crazy, but it's my favorite song or album. So as far as not as far as Metallica is concerned, because Ride the Lightning is still my favorite Metallica album, but this is number two for me. But it's my favorite of the big four that came out in that 12-month period. I know you already mentioned what your favorite was, which was this one. But what else do you have to say about this album?
It's all right. No, uh, I mean, this was probably the album that captured me the most with Metallica. Like I've mentioned before, like in my high school years, I was a really big Metallica fan. You know, the two albums for me, well, really three albums, I would say that really got me into them were Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. And from beginning to end, this is another album that I think is pretty damn near perfect. It's hard to argue with that, and you're right in a lot of ways. It kind of drifts away from the formula of being a thrash album, but this is still pretty early on in the thrash era, and it's still like technically it falls into it's like if you think about it the context of the time it still falls into like the thrash genre, but yeah, there's songs that are definitely not. I mean, Orion's not a thrash song by any means. It finds more roots in just heavy metal, right? Master of Puppets, that's definitely not really just a thrash song, but it is. A Battery definitely is more, but like it doesn't even matter. Like it's the music that appealed to those fan bases at the time. And obviously, there was people that say they stopped being thrash after 15 minutes of playing or something. There's ones that like say they sold out after Kill 'Em All. Who cares? It's just good music. Um, so I mean, while I'm not, the biggest mark for Metallica out there, I still love this album. I think it's undeniable how good it is. It's definitely the best album of 1986, and I'm not talking about your favorite. I'm talking about it's the best album of 1986 for metal. And you know how I will get on your case about talking about Metallica on every episode, but let's be real. Like this is the time to celebrate them because like this is their best album, at least in my opinion.
I can see that argument. So I just looked it up, and between Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth, the four albums, and basically there's another thing to understand. These are four classic albums, not just any four albums. Four classic where you're basically looking at staples of these bands' careers. Okay. Peace sells, but who's buying from Megadeth? I mean, it is a staple. Slayer's Rain and Blood, staple. Anthrax, Among the Living, they've built their career on this album and they ride
They
it
pretty
to
much
this
play the
day.
whole album every show.
Exactly. All right. And then Master Puppets, so the 12 months almost to the day, March 16th is when Anthrax came out with Among the Living, and March 3rd is when Metallica came out with Master of Puppets. So it's literally 54-week period. These
Mm.
four albums came out. So that's incredible in and of itself. Anyhow, 1986 is just an amazing, amazing year for music. It wasn't just those thrash albums. I mean, there was also the other half of the metal, the glam stuff, and the you don't want to call it pop metal if you want, or whatever straightforward heavy metal. I mean, Accept came out with Russian Roulette that year. Um, we mentioned earlier Black Sabbath with Seven Star. You mentioned Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet. How huge was that album? Yeah, no, it is Bon Jovi's biggest selling album. It's a diamond album. Man, that's incredible that came out. Um, Exciter comes out now. We don't talk much about Exciter, and I think, Chris, I think we should do an episode on Canadian metal. I think
Okay.
some of our fans will really dig that. And
We have to
Exciter,
talk about Fozzy.
we don't have to.
I'm just kidding.
But Exciter, I mean, out of Canada, this is their I want to say it's their third album. I'm not exactly sure. It was the one album that I figured out who they were at that point, and I was one of the first bands where I didn't understand like the what the guy was singing about. It was because he was singing a similar vocal styling to Brian Johnson, but with a higher pitch, which I don't know how you could do that. But interesting album in and of itself. Flotsam and Jetsam comes out with their debut album Doomsday for the Deceiver, and guess what? Later that year, their bass player leaves. Um, Great White, Shot in the Dark, which basically began the string of hit albums for them. We mentioned Guns N' Roses released their debut EP, Live Like a Suicide. No one knew who they were, but they were coming. We mentioned Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Turbo. That came out in '86. I mean, think about that.
Or don't.
Or
It's
don't. You don't want to. Uh, Creator came out with Pleasure to Kill. Lizzie Borden had two albums. They had a Menace to Society, their studio album, and then they came out with their double LP live album, Murderous Metal Roadshow. Yngwie Malmsteen. Ozzy came out that year. We're going to talk about him in a second. Uh, Quiet Riot with Quiet Riot 3. I listened to this album the other day, dude. So, when was the last time you heard it, or have you heard it at all? That's the album with Wild and the Young on it.
um I listened to it for some reason, and it was a couple years. I'm trying to remember why I listened to it, but it's a different one for sure.
So I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh my god, this sounds like an '80s B movie. The whole album sounds like this cheesy, like Miami Vice Friday Night TV '80s shit. It was fucking terrible. The one song, "The Wild and the Young," was pretty good. I think they had one other really good song on it, and that was about it. But it literally did not age well. It sounds like like if someone puts on one of those, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they put on Showtime or you know Cinemax, and it's not because it's a nudie movie, but you just put that music, the soundtrack that plays in those movies from the '80s. This is like Quiet Riot wrote that damn soundtrack. you know? Uh,
Wow.
Sabotage, Fight for the Rock or Fight for the Rock. Sepultura, their debut album came out in '86. Morbid Visions, Striper to Hell with the Devil. One band that you and we've talked about very briefly, the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, with their first album in '86. So
That's uh that's one I think we should talk about more sometime.
yeah, we should
I
because
think
but
we
the
should
thing
do an episode on the albums that members of Kiss released.
that would be an interesting episode. That would be an
Yeah.
interesting episode. Voivod came out with the album Roar. Wasp, Inside the Electric Circus. Um, that's a really good album. I know we're heading into our big four, but we want to talk about something a little bit for you guys tonight. We mentioned a lot of bands. We didn't mention some on purpose. Um, so if you have a chance and an opportunity after you listen to this episode, if you want to listen to some of the older episodes, you'll notice that one thing that really stood out to me when I was going through this is we did a lot of head to heads on albums from this year.
Coincidentally, even.
Coincidentally, yes. I mean, we didn't do it on purpose, but let's bring it up here. Cinderella's debut album, Night Songs. We put it up head to head up against Tesla's Mechanical Resonance, their debut album. Both came out in 1986. That's episode 119. If you want to catch that, that's back in December of 22. We did Iron Maiden head to head with Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. That came out on episode 52 back in February of 21. We did King Diamond versus Merciful Fates, Don't Break the Oath, and King Diamond's Fatal Portrait, which was his debut solo record. That was episode 92, March of 22. Um, a surprise episode that I know that Chris is gonna think about a little bit right here. Ozzy's The Ultimate Sin versus Bark at the Moon, and we were on opposing sides, and at the end of the night, we were we may have been, if you got to listen to it, on episode 69. Listen to the opinions on that one. Ozzy Ultimate Sin versus the Bark at the Moon. You'll see where we land on that afterward.
Yeah, it surprised me. So
there's a few more. Episode 74, David Lee Roth, Eat 'Em and Smile versus Van Halen's 5150. So David Lee Roth goes solo. Van Halen gets Sammy Hagar. We put the first two albums head to head. That was episode 74 that came out in October of 21. And one last album that I want to mention briefly before we go to the big four, TT Quick released their debut album called Medal of Honor. The only significance to that, Mark Tornillo was the singer for that album. I think that's the only album that TT Quick put out, and that career went downhill. And for whatever reason, he remained relevant. He ended up becoming the singer for Accept in the early 2000s or 2010s. Excuse me, I think it was 2011 he became the singer. So some pretty cool stuff. I mean, there's a lot of shit that happened in 1986. Let me tell you.
wait, you're gonna tell me? No, I'm just playing.
All right, so we're into our big four now. The big four, our big four. So, what my favorite four albums of 1986 are. Your favorite four albums of 1986. I'm going to go first since you started off.
All right.
I've been talking like a madman here, so let me get over with so you can start talking. All right, my big four. We'll go through them real quick. Number 4 for me, Cinderella, Night Songs. That album front to back is absolutely amazing. It wasn't even an indicator of what was to come for Cinderella, because they really expanded on the blues that they had used throughout this album, and they did it more on Long Cold Winter. Number 3 for me, Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet. That album played on my radio all the time. Man, these albums, everything that we've mentioned tonight, I played at some point on my radio over and over and over and over again. But Bon Jovi was on there. Number 2 for me, Rain and Blood from Slayer. Like I said, when you talked about it earlier, Chris, it was I played that song a lot, the album a lot. I played that album a lot. I knew all those songs back to front. So it was definitely one that played much more than Megadeth for whatever reason. And number 1 was Master of Puppets. We already mentioned that for me. So that's my big four metal albums of 1986. What do you got?
So my number 4 is Force Majeure by Baby Tuku. No.
What?
I have no idea.
The fuck did you come up with that?
You get the full list of 1986 albums, and I saw that one. And I'm just like, who the hell's that?
All right.
Uh, no, for real. My number my number 4 is Slayer's Rain and Blood. I mean, for all the reasons we spoke about earlier. Absolutely amazing album. If you haven't listened to it, you're stupid. No, no, you're just uninformed. My number 3 is Megadeth Peace Cells, but who's buying? Yeah, again, for all the reasons we said before, we spoke about it in great detail. Absolutely amazing album. This was one that really got me into Megadeth. Love it. My number 2 is Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time. Again, like I said, any given time, it's my favorite Iron Maiden album. And then my number 1 is going to be First Kill by Tigers of Pantic. No, it's Metallica's Master of Puppets. It's probably going to be one of the only times that Metallica's right there on the top of my list, but it's that good of an album. So if you disagree, let us know, but you're wrong.
Bend the knee. All right. Well, we've talked enough for tonight, so that's our big four metal albums for 1986. That's the end of this episode of Debating Metal. Remember, you can listen to us just about every week on your favorite podcast platform, and if you want to see us grow, don't forget to click like or subscribe, and tell your friends about us so they can click like or subscribe, and they can enjoy us too.
And don't forget you can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and our new X/Twitter account, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new show. And remember to tune in to the next episode when we'll talk about Baby Tuku.
Baby, baby
Once,
Tuku.
once I do some more research on who the hell that is, and we'll spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
Baby Tuku. See ya.